In a typical Japanese household, a mother is busily preparing breakfast for her child, who is about to head off to school. She calls out to her daughter, Sue Hagen, urging her to get out of bed and come eat. After a bit of stretching and checking the time, Sue finally rises and begins her morning routine. She splashes some water on her face to wake up fully, then asks her mom where her clothes are, specifically her school uniform. She finishes up by applying a bit of makeup. Just as she is about to leave for school, Sue stops and asks her mom one last question: has she seen her Jiujitsu uniform? Her mom answers her question, but then, noticing the look on her face, she remarks that Sue must really care about Ken. Nervously, Sue asks what her mom means by that. At that moment, her father, overhearing the conversation, chimes in, teasing that Ken is still her crush. He adds that if it's true, he's quite disappointed. Feeling annoyed by her parents' teasing, Sue asks her dad for some money, grabs her Jiujitsu uniform, and heads off to school. A little while later, Sue is ringing the doorbell at Ken's house. Instead of Ken, his father, still sleepy, opens the door. She asks him where Jean is, but the confused father points out that Jean already left 20 minutes ago, much to her annoyance. Sue thanks him and rushes off to find Jean. After a bit of running, she finally catches sight of Jean and quickly puts him in a headlock, affectionately yet annoyingly calling him Piggy. The large and chubby guy, Lin Jean, explains that he went on ahead because he prefers to take his time getting to school. Sue invites Jean to join her for Jiujitsu practice, but Jean just stares at her. Suddenly, he pulls her close as a passing car nearly hits her. Jean then scolds her for carrying 2 bags and takes her Jiujitsu bag for her. Blushing, Sue catches up with Jean, and they chat about everything and nothing as they head to school. Jean takes his seat and notices the guy in front of him getting bullied and extorted for money again by a thug named John Koch. It seemed like any other day, but something compelled Jean to pay closer attention to the altercation. As Jun Suk begins slapping the kid for refusing to buy them bread, Jean knows he shouldn't get involved, but he can't help himself. He slams some bread into Jun Suk's mouth and throws him to the ground. Realizing he might have overdone it, Jean asks Jun Suk if he's okay. Spitting out the bloody bread, Jun Suk angrily demands to know what's wrong with him. Jean tries to explain that he got annoyed with Jun Suk constantly asking for bread, so he gave him some. Jungkook gets frustrated and starts pummeling someone's face. But after a while, he gets scared since Jean is still standing, seemingly built like a rock. Jungkook grabs a chair and tries to hit Jean with it, but Jean easily dodges out of the way. Just then, the door opens and Sue walks in, wanting to hang out with Jean. Seeing Jin's injured face, Jungkook quickly gets nervous. He tries to talk to her, but she just walks up to Jun Suk and asks if he did that to Jean. Jean tries to explain that he struck first, but Sue suddenly tackles Jun Suk to the ground. Meanwhile, in a coffee shop in the city, Sue and Jin's fathers meet to catch up with each other. Jin's dad shares that Sue woke him up that morning and then ran off really fast. They reminisce about the past when young Jin was constantly picked on, and Sue would beat up the bullies for him. Jin's dad asks if Sue still fights boys nowadays, but Sue's father explains how gentle she has become, unable even to harm a single bug. Meanwhile, at that very moment in school, Sage tackles Jun Suk to the ground and tries to put him in a stranglehold. Sue tries to pull Sage off Jun Suk, but continues to threaten him for hurting someone named Sae Jun. Eventually, Jean manages to drag Sage away from the bully and out of the room. Jun Suk glares angrily at them, promising they will pay for what they've done. Later, another thug named Jae Suk bursts into Sage's classroom looking for him. Upon seeing Sue, he asks Jun Suk if he really got beaten up by a larger person. Jean apologizes, but Jae Suk slaps him in the face, telling Jean that he should fight him instead. Jean cowers and promises never to do it again. Jae Suk finally gets the hint and leaves the classroom. As they walk away, Jun Suk asks if he's really going to leave it like that. After school, Jean and Sue are walking home together, unaware that Jae Suk is watching them from afar. The next day, Jean is sitting in his classroom when another student tells him he should go to Sue's class. Why? Sue has just been drenched in ink after a trap exploded in her desk. She asks her classmates who did it, but they all nervously turn away, claiming they didn't see anything. Sue is shaking with anger when Jean wraps her in his own uniform, advising that they should first go clean up. Jun Suk, who was watching the commotion, gets annoyed since Jean didn't even show any emotion to what had just happened. Later, in his own classroom, the kid sitting in front of Jean apologizes, saying they're being targeted by bullies because Jean saved him. Jean smiles and tells him it's not his fault. He then walks out of the classroom, angrily marching to confront the real person responsible. Jean barges into Ji-Suk's classroom, where he and his goons are hanging out. Jean demands that Ji-Suk apologize to Sue and pay for her uniform. Jae-Suk pretends not to know what Jean is talking about and taunts him, asking what he'll do if he really did it. Jean admits that he had thought long and hard about what he'd do if Jae-Suk apologized, but now that he hasn't, he doesn't need to worry about it. Joon-Suk thinks Jean is mocking them, so he tries to punch him. However, Jean beats him to it, sending Joon-Suk's head into the wall with a powerful punch. Bleeding from his nose, Joon-Suk yells for his friends to attack Jean. One thug tries to punch him, but Jean sweeps him off his feet and blasts him away. Another manages to land a hit on Jean, but he just endures the punch, tackles the guy, and slams him into the ground. Jean stands back up, panting, while Jungkook is shocked that he's actually good at fighting. Meanwhile, Jae-Suk just applauds him. He asks again if Jean is finished warming up, then settles into a wrestling stance and tells Jean to fight him. After a while, Jean is panting heavily, unable to land a hit on Jae-Suk. Jisoo points out that Jean is getting slower and slower, and Jae-Suk can even dodge him with his hands behind his back. Jean stops to catch his breath, and Jae-Suk tells him that if he gets on his knees, he'll forgive him and his girlfriend. Jean rejects the offer, replying that Jae-Suk is talking too much. This distraction allows Jean to quickly tackle Jae-Suk with a surprise takedown, but Jae-Suk smiles and puts his arm around Jin's neck. Jean thought he was winning once he took Jae-Suk down and put his weight on him, but he suddenly couldn't breathe. Jae-Suk had put him in a chokehold, with his arms around Jin's neck and his legs around his body. Jean was about to pass out when Sue suddenly barges into the scene and kicks Jae-Suk in the face, knocking him off Jean. Jae-Suk can't believe he got hit by a girl. Joon-Suk explains that Sue has been practicing martial arts since she was young. Jae-Suk dismisses this, saying she's still just a girl, and grabs Sue by the hair. He's about to tell her off when he notices Jean mouthing for her to run away. This confuses Jae-Suk, and Sue finally speaks up, asking if he's never been beaten up by a girl before. Jae-Suk gets angry at her audacity and punches her, but she skillfully dodges his punch and uses his momentum to slam him into the ground. Before he can recover, Sue puts his arm in an arm bar and starts to break it. Ji-Suk tries to tap out, but Sue tells him that bullies can't tap out. He starts apologizing and owning up to all his mistakes, so Sue finally lets him go, warning him to never bully others again. She then helps Jean leave the classroom. As they leave, Jungkook asks Ji-Suk what they should do now since they still haven't extorted the money they need from the other students. Jae-Suk glares at the departing duo and shares that he has a fun idea. Later, Sue and Jean are walking home, and Sue asks Jean if he's really okay. She points out that he couldn't even get out of the hold earlier, suggesting that he should study Jiujitsu with her. Jean, finally annoyed with her pushy attitude, decides to go home. Sue laments that he isn't going to take her to the gym, wishing she could stay with him longer but unable to say it. At home, Sue texts Jean to ask if he arrived at the gym, but he's still annoyed at what happened earlier, so he decides to sleep it off. A few hours later, his father suddenly barges into his room and wakes him up. His father asks Jean why he hasn't been picking up his phone, and Jean realizes his phone is full of missed calls. Jin's dad then sadly informs him that something bad has happened to Sue, and they rush to the hospital emergency room, where his parents are anxiously waiting for news from the doctor. Despite being drenched in sweat and his feet bloody from running, Jean quickly asks about Sue's condition and what happened. Meanwhile, his father catches up to him and gives him some slippers to wear. Jean tries to explain how he failed to go with Sue to the gym, leaving her to go alone. Just then, a detective from the Department of Criminal Affairs interrupts and asks to speak with him. The detective leads Jean to another room and explains that he's in charge of the case. They suspect it was a group assault but don't yet know who was involved. He asks Jean if he knows anyone who has a bad relationship with Sue. Jean abruptly remembers the bully Sue had beaten up yesterday, so he quickly gives the detective the names of Jae-Suk and Joon-Suk. He then asks the detective what happened. The detective explains that Sue was found in an alley after being assaulted and left unconscious. She was abandoned there, with the right side of her face hit hard and her left knee grievously injured. They presumed that since she was hit by fists and her knee was twisted using a martial arts technique, it could be related to someone with Jiujitsu skills. Jin recalls that Jae-suk also knows Jiujitsu, and the detective promises to investigate it. A few hours later, Sue's surgery finally finishes, and the doctor reports to her parents that it went well. If she works hard to rehabilitate her left knee, there won't be any issues with her daily life. However, the doctor also warns them that the mental aftereffects might be more serious than the physical trauma. In the distance, Jin is eavesdropping, his face buried in his hands. A few moments later, they visit Sue's room, and upon seeing her bruised and injured face, Jin tears up and hardens his resolve. A few days later, Jin angrily shouts at the detective handling Sue's case, Detective Jang, after he concludes that Jae-suk and Jun-suk were not the culprits. Detective Jang explains that the CCTV at the office tower next to the alley where Sue was found was broken and scheduled for repair. While he was explaining, Jin sneakily glances at the detective's case file and sees the mention of the gold office tower. Detective Jang quickly hides the case file and advises Jin not to visit the police station suddenly anymore. Determined, Jin declares that he'll take care of it himself. Detective Jang watches him leave and advises his subordinate to find out what Jin is doing in his spare time. Later that night at the gold office tower, Jae-suk and Jun-suk are leaving with girls in their arms. They plan to smoke in the alley when they notice someone already waiting there. It's Jin, who slowly stands up and asks if they were the ones who hurt Sue. Jun-suk can't hold back his laughter and teases Jin, but Jin punches him right in the face. He also slaps Jun-suk, who is shaking in terror. He's about to punch him again when he notices Jae-suk charging at him. Jae-suk ducks under his punch and grabs hold of his leg, using that leverage to bring Jin down. Jae-suk then moves to Jin's face and starts pummeling him. He tells him that this time he'll do it right, just like what happened to Sue's leg. Meanwhile, Jin cannot move his arms because they are pinned by Jae-suk sitting on top of him. After delivering some powerful blows to Jin's face, Jae-suk performs an armbar on Jin's arm, threatening to break it. But before he can, a long-haired man with no shirt interrupts them and orders Jae-suk to let go. As the man approaches, Jae-suk immediately senses that he is dangerous. Therefore, he quickly lets go of Jin and backs off. He asks the men who he is to interrupt them when Jin was the first to deliver a punch, but the guy just tells him to leave. Jae-suk notices that the girls and Jun-suk are still watching them, so not wanting to look like a coward in front of them, he slaps the man on the shoulder. The man asks if he really wants to see his skills and faces Jae-suk. Jae-suk shakes in terror, but the man abruptly pulls out a cell phone and calls the police. Jae-suk quickly leaves before the police can arrive, leaving Jin with the man, tears falling from his eyes. Jin thanks the man, who sits beside him and calls him Piggy, Sue's friend. He then introduces himself as Sue's exercise buddy, Jin, and asks how he knew him. The man explains that Sue always shows his pictures to them. He then asks if Sue hasn't yet woken up, and Jin shakes his head. The man then tells him that the bully earlier wasn't the one who hurt Sue. This piques Jin's attention, and he asks the guy how he knows that. However, the guy just replies that it's a gut feeling. The man then shows Jin a flyer for his jiu-jitsu gym and tells him that if he attacks the guy from earlier 100 times, he'll just lose 100 times. If he wants to beat him, he must learn. A few days later, in front of the key jiu-jitsu gym, Jin is pondering what he should do. He doesn't have enough money to enroll in the gym, and he's also nervous that there might be a lot of scary people inside. Two guys hear his muttering and surprise him by answering his questions. They introduce themselves as members of the gym and start dragging him inside. While being pushed inside, Jin can't help but think that there are a lot of people like Sue in there. He then notices that the long-haired guy who invited him there is sleeping on the mat. The two men call the long-haired guy Jason Hyun and wake him up. They notice that Jason already knows Jin, and when he explains that he was Sue's piggy, they finally realize why he looks so familiar. Jin nervously backs out of the gym, trying to explain that he has no money, but another man intervenes. The owner, blocking the way, asks Jin how much he's lacking. Despite the owner's offer of student discounts, Jin insists he truly has no money. The owner continues to lower the tuition offer until a member suggests a different idea, allowing Jin to attend the gym for free. The owner starts to protest, but the member proposes doing deliveries to cover Jin's gym fees, suggesting Jin could promote their gym through their weight loss program. They see potential in Jin's tall stature and pleasant appearance, believing he could be a model for their Jiujitsu program promoting holistic health. Intrigued by the idea, the others discuss and plan Jin's workout and diet routine for the next 3 months without waiting for his consent. Jin tries to tiptoe away, but Jason grabs him firmly by the head and insists he put on his Jiujitsu uniform. Jin realizes he's trapped this time. 3 months later, the members of the key Jiujitsu gym are panting heavily after a long sparring session. They complain that Jin is hard to deal with because of his size and height. They then remember that Jin's 3 months are almost up and they congratulate him for a job well done. Jin smiles and replies that he still has a long way to go. Now fit and handsome, he tells them that this is just the beginning. Not only has Jin lost a ton of weight, but the members also compliment Jin for gaining 2 stripes on his Jiu-Jitsu belt, proof that he is learning. The owner and their instructor then instructed them to line up and ended their lessons for today. Meanwhile, Jason tells Keegan that they will now work on his muscle strength. The others are cast by his brutal training methods, and even Surgeon complains that he still hasn't gotten his breath back yet. Jason suggests they should have a more intense session tomorrow, but Jin decides to proceed with the workout. As the sun begins to set, Sergeant finishes his muscle training with one-arm pull-ups at the park. Jason asks why he seems weaker today, and Jin explains they just finished Jiu-Jitsu. However, Jason effortlessly demonstrates his strength, earning admiration from Jin. After training, Jin treats himself to some ice cream. Jason asks how Hagen is doing now. Jin's mood darkens as he admits he's unsure. She woke up 12 days after being hospitalized, and Jin rushed to her side upon hearing the news. However, he stopped upon seeing her eyes, which seemed to tell him not to approach. Her father later informed him that due to shock, Hagen didn't want to talk or meet anyone except family. Weeks later, Jin's family focused on her rehabilitation. Jason asks about the police investigation, and Jin expresses doubt about their progress. Jason questions if he'll seek out those who hurt Hagen, reminding him that martial arts aren't meant for hurting others. He leaves, leaving Jin to contemplate his path. Days later at school, Jisuk and Junseok are planning their extortion scheme again, promising to gather their victims. Later at school, Ji-Suk receives a call from Junseok, informing him that he's gathered the victims. A girl approaches Ji-Suk and tells him someone wants to see him on the roof. Curious, Jae-Suk asks who it is, but the girl only mentions he's handsome and tries to get his number. In the bathroom, Junseok is extorting money from the bullied kids when the door suddenly opens, revealing a new arrival. John C. approaches, and despite Junseok's attempts to deter him, the newcomer asserts he's there to clean up the trash, Jin. When a bully challenges Jin, he swiftly grabs him and delivers a punch, commanding the others to leave. Despite Junseok's efforts to intervene, Sergeant stops him with a blow to the stomach. As the other bullies try to attack Jin, he skillfully dodges their punches and retaliates. Junseok demands to know his problem, but Jin grabs him by the throat and demands he tell Ji-Suk that he's ready to fight again. On the rooftop, Jae-Suk is puzzled as no one is there to meet him. His phone rings, it's Junseok on the line, warning him that Jin is coming for him. As Jae-Suk was about to enter the bathroom, the rooftop door abruptly swung open, hitting him in the face. Jin apologizes, noticing his bleeding nose, and asks how he's been. Jae-Suk demands to know why Jin called him to the rooftop. Instead of answering, Sergeant punches him in the face. Jae-Suk smiles arrogantly, mocking Jin's weight loss, but Jin lands another punch. Frustrated, Jae-Suk tries to retaliate, but Jin calmly dodges and counters with an elbow strike. Jae-Suk attempts to tackle Jin's legs, but Sergeant anticipates it and counters with his knee, impressing even Jae-Suk with his skill. During this, Jisoo recalls Jin's training sessions with Jason, emphasizing his sparring and Jason's instruction. Jason focuses on teaching Jin how to pass the guard effectively and improve his position, essential skills for real-life scenarios. Jin questions if these techniques really work in real fights, but Jason insists that mastering them is crucial before moving on to mixed martial arts. Jason had warned Jin that due to his height, opponents might try to tackle him to the ground, advising him to respond with a knee attack when this happens. He emphasized the effectiveness of a guard position called the flower, difficult for non-Jiujitsu practitioners to counter, urging Jin to keep his training a secret. Now facing Ji-Suk in the flower guard position, Jin follows Jason's advice, delivering a powerful kick to Ji-Suk's thighs. Jae-Suk cries out in pain from the blow, and before he can recover, Jin seizes his leg and sweeps it sideways, leaving Jae-Suk vulnerable. Jin capitalizes on this opening, delivering a knee strike to Jae-Suk's stomach. Jae-Suk demands to know where Jin learned Jiujitsu, but Jin remains silent, focused on the fight. He finds it surprisingly manageable to handle Jae-Suk compared to Jason's rigorous training sessions. Jason's words echo in Jin's mind as Jae-Suk taunts him, recounting how Hagen was lively before the incident but became fearful and defensive afterward. Jae-Suk cruelly mentions Jin's failure to answer Hagen's calls or escort her safely to the gym, blaming him for the tragedy. Hagen's battered face flashes vividly in Jin's mind. Jae-Suk capitalizes on his distraction and slams Jin back into the ground. He then jumps and stomps on Sejun's face. Jin manages to block it, so Jae-Suk continues his attack, grappling with Sejun on the ground. He kicks Sejun in the face and simultaneously grabs hold of his arms and legs, using a guarding technique called spider guard. With Jae-Suk now immobilized, Jin tells him that he knows he wasn't acting alone when he hurt Hagen. Sejun grabs Jae-Suk's collar and kicks him at the same time, bringing him down so now he's the one standing over him. Jae-Suk tries to defend himself again, but the earlier thigh kick has robbed him of his strength. This allows Jin to fully mount Ji-Suk's body and pummel his face relentlessly, with Ji-Suk unable to defend himself. Jin continues, telling Ji-Suk that he knows Ji-Suk wasn't strong enough to defeat him. That's why he's going to find each and every one of them and make them pay for what they did to Hagen, returning their pain 100-fold. Now fully beaten, Ji-Suk cries out, begging Jin to stop after receiving his punishment. He cannot see any more from his left eye. However, Jin doesn't stop and instead asks him who his accomplices are. When Gicf doesn't answer, he punches him again. Giseo cries out that he doesn't know anything, but Sejun just puts his arm in an Americana, a submission technique that puts immense pressure on the opponent's shoulder. Sergeant starts putting pressure on Gi-Suk's shoulder and explains that he has two options. He can either tell him who was involved and he'll let him go, or he can break his shoulder. Jae-Suk threatens him by asking if he can handle the aftermath of what he's doing, but Jin answers back if they thought about the aftermath of Jin's injury. Gi-Suk finally realizes that Jin is serious and he cries out a name Sun joke. When he was a third-year student who was there that day, Jin asks if there's anyone else, and Jae-Suk yells out that wasn't the deal. The deal was for Jin to let him go. However, Jin starts putting pressure on his hole again, and Jae-Suk was forced to reveal that there were also people from other schools. He's just a small fry, so he doesn't know anything else. At that moment, a teacher arrives and sees their altercation GI class and tells Jen that his life is over now since he's clearly the victim, but someone just kicks him again in the face and replies that he should wait until the end to see whose life really is over. A few minutes later, JC's dad is shouting at the principal, demanding Jin to be kicked out of the school. Meanwhile, Jin is just pondering whether the gathering with other schools is an alliance. However, he first needs to recover and find Do-hyun. Day 6's mother silently enters the room and approaches Kyung. Without warning, she tries to slap Sejun, who reacts quickly and deflects her hand. Taken aback, Day 6's mother begins shouting at him, demanding justice for her injured son. Sejun's father arrives and checks on his son, while Day 6's mother continues to berate him, insisting that Jin should be expelled for what he did. Sejun's father, feeling the weight of the accusations, apologizes, but Day 6's mother persists in calling for harsh consequences. The principal intervenes, proposing to convene a violence committee to investigate the incident thoroughly. In contrast, Jin's father suggests a more conciliatory approach, wanting to understand the full story from the students involved. The tension escalates as Day 6's mother refuses to consider anything but expulsion for Jin, fueling a heated argument. Sejun's father defends his wife's stance vehemently, even threatening to leverage his connections with the principal to ensure Jin's expulsion. Sensing the escalation, Jin's father calmly questions the fairness of using personal connections in resolving school matters, hinting at his own influential ties. The principal, caught between parental conflict and administrative duty, listens intently. When Jin's father makes a call, the principal recognizes the voice on the other end as that of the school chairman, introducing a new twist to the unfolding drama. The chairman exchanges pleasantries with Sejun's father and listens as he requests a favor. After a brief conversation, Sejun's father hands his phone over to the principal. Initially skeptical, Jin's father observes the principal's visibly nervous reaction, realizing the chairman's influence is genuine. Later, as Soo-jin and his father drive home, Soo-jin apologizes for causing trouble at school. His father reassures him and acknowledges that he had to seek help from the chairman. He gently probes why Sejun has been so dedicated to his workouts lately, but Sejun remains silent. His father assures him of his support and emphasizes that violence is never justified. Sejun asks why his father isn't angry, to which his father replies that he trusts Sejun and has promised his wife to raise him right. A few days later, the other members from the gym are curious about Sejun's facial injuries. Sejun informs them that he fell while motorcycling with his dad, and they believe his explanation. They decide to postpone using Sejun as their gym model for now. However, the gym owner warns Sejun about the consequences of using Jiujitsu outside of self-defense. Despite the teasing from his peers about his cool line, they continue their training for the day. After their training session, they decide to have a few sparring matches. Sejun is confident that he might hold his own now, but he's easily defeated and disarmed by the others. After the sparring, Sejun asks about Jason's whereabouts, learning that he went out to distribute promotional flyers. Meanwhile, they inquire if Sejun has spoken to someone yet, but he sadly replies that he hasn't. The guy then shares that Hagen used to mention Sejun all the time, from their time at the gym to when she left. If Hagen had to wait for someone, it would definitely be Sejun. At school, Jae-suk reports to his boss, the third-year student, about how their extortion plans were disrupted due to Hagen and Sejun's intervention. He explains Sejun's sudden weight loss and improved Jiujitsu skills. Jae-suk accepts his excuse and starts changing his clothes, asking Jae-suk about his training frequency and challenging him to a spar to assess his skills. In another scene, Jun-suk holds his bloody face and admits defeat to Jae-suk. However, Jae-suk tells him they'll only stop when he decides, landing a punch at Jun-suk's side, sending him to the ground unconscious. Jae-suk orders Jun-suk to collect the money and bring it tomorrow, with a visible terror on Jun-suk's face as he realizes his impending fate. Meanwhile, Sejun patiently waits in another neighborhood in front of an apartment complex. Two individuals exit the building, Hagen and her mom. Hagen's mom notices Sejun and he politely greets both of them. Hagen looks at him and suggests they go to a nearby cafe. Her mom mentions to Sejun how Hagen has been acting strangely, likely because of his arrival today. Meanwhile, Sejun watches Hagen as she walks with her crutches, contemplating how she appears both frail and yet a heroine of a tragedy. At the cafe, Hagen asks why he suddenly called and invited her to meet. Sejun apologizes for only reaching out now and tells her about learning Jiujitsu. He mentions how everyone at the gym misses her. They chat about school, but Hagen dismisses it as a waste of time, opting for a special exam instead. They playfully tease each other, and Sejun is relieved to see her looking better than he expected. He recalls Detective Jane mentioning that Hagen doesn't remember what happened due to trauma, which might come back someday. Meanwhile, Hagen blushes at how Sejun stares at her. Sejun is about to ask if she remembers anything from the attack when a customer slams the bathroom door, startling them both. The loud bang triggers Hagen, causing her to shake badly and cry. Sejun tries to comfort her, but she shouts at him not to touch her and to call her mom. Sejun realizes that Hagen isn't okay and is still battling her inner demons. This strengthens his resolve about what he needs to do. The next day at school, Jungkook is back in their classroom, extorting money from his classmates. Sejun approaches him ominously, asking if he knows the third-year student named Do-hyun and if so, to lead him to him. In the third-year classroom, Do-hyun is diligently studying when Jun-suk crashes into the room with a loud bang. He walks up to Do-hyun and confronts him, asking if he's the one. Do-hyun's classmates protest Jun-suk's rude behavior, but Do-hyun calms them down. Sejun asks Do-hyun about what happened that day with Hagen. Do-hyun initially feigns ignorance, but Sejun reveals he recorded Jae-suk saying Do-hyun's name. Concerned, Do-hyun asks if Sejun plans to go to the police, but Sejun admits he wants to handle it himself by finding those who hurt Hagen. Do-hyun chuckles at Sejun's confident declaration and starts to appreciate his determination. He decides to tell Sejun everything but wants something in return. Sejun must either collect money from his classmates or try to fight Do-hyun, just as he plans to confront his own adversaries. Do-hyun prepares to strike, but Sejun stops him in his tracks, surprising Do-hyun with his agility and composure. Sejun then backs off, smiling, as their teacher enters the room, preventing any further confrontation for now. Instead, he'll wait for his answer until tomorrow. After school, Do-hyun and his friends are walking when his phone suddenly vibrates with a text from his mom, urging him to sleep at a friend's house because creditors are at their home again. Do-hyun's mood changes abruptly, and he tells his friends they need to cancel their plans for the day. Meanwhile, Jin is pondering over Do-hyun's earlier punch. He wonders if that kind of speed and power can only come from boxing, realizing that in a fight, he might get hit before he can even use Jiujitsu. He considers if Jason can teach him a counter to such moves. As Jin walks down another street lost in thought, Do-hyun's friends suddenly block his path. Jin asks why they're there, and Do-hyun appears behind them. Do-hyun explains that he's in a tough situation and needs Jin's answer now, whether they'll fight or Jin will collect the money. Jin is puzzled by Do-hyun's sudden change in behavior but has already made his decision. He nonchalantly starts rummaging in his bag, which confuses Do-hyun. However, it turns out Jin is just retrieving boxing gloves. He tells Do-hyun it's just a precaution so he won't hurt him too badly when he hits him. Do-hyun asks him if he's ready and then starts attacking. Jin was in his stance, prepared to receive the attack, but Do-hyun's fists are so fast that it almost passes through his defense. While he was reeling from the punch, Do-hyun followed it up with another haymaker to his ribs. Lastly, Do-hyun delivers a fist straight to his face, but thankfully he manages to block it with his arms, which surprises Do-hyun. But this just makes Do-hyun decide to hit him more as he rains down, punch after punch all over again. Jin tries to give a punch of his own, but Do-hyun calmly ducks and gives him an uppercut straight to his chin. Jin falls and Do-hyun catches him, but it turns out this was a plan of Jin so he can wrap his arms around Do-chien and catch him. Jin plans to bring Do-chien to the ground. However, Do-hyun hits him again in the chin with his shoulder, stunning him, getting Do-hyun a chance to put his arm around Sejun's neck. With nowhere to go, Do-hyun starts giving him multiple hefty punches right to the face. Jin falls to his knees and Do-hyun promises to not bother him anymore as long as he doesn't interfere in their business. As for Hagen, Do-hyun admits he feels sorry for her too, but since she seems to be able to recover fully, they should just leave it alone. However, Jin suddenly grabs Do-hyun's leg and yells out that he's not giving up. Their Do-hyun is surprised that Jin still has strength, but he also recognizes that it was Jin's last chance. Do-hyun pulls out his lei with his stronger physique and tells of the law of the jungle, where the strongest survives. No matter how good the world looks, its nature will never change. That's why someone who is weaker than him won't get any information from him. He then delivers a powerful punch to Jin's face. To everyone's shock, his punch was blocked by another face, that of a long-haired man. It was the face of Jason Young. The other Jin members laugh at Jason's face while checking up on Jin. Meanwhile, Do-hyun is confused how Jason can endure a direct punch from him in the face. Do-hyun's classmates start angrily asking them who they are. One of them pulls one of the gym members by the shoulder, but he suddenly shouts how his shoulder was attacked. He shouts out for someone to call an ambulance. Slowly but surely, people walking by start glancing at them, wondering what all the commotion is all about. Meanwhile, Do-hyun's curiosity got the better of him and he asks Jason how he endured his punch. Jason gets confused and simply replies that it was because it was weak. Seeing that they are getting the attention of a lot of people, Do-hyun was about to leave, but unfortunately the cops had already arrived at the police station. Do-hyun explains to the police that it wasn't a fight, but they were actually just sparring. After all, he was wearing gloves. The police decide to ask Jin too, which makes Do-hyun nervous since if he gets a case against him, he won't be able to participate in boxing competitions and even collect the money he needed. He relaxes. One remembers how Jin mentioned before that he doesn't want the police to get involved too. After all, Sejun can't make any hasty statements since he also needs something from Dobkin. But to his disappointment, Jin calmly states that he got assaulted and Do-hyun got suspended. A little while later, Sujun is eating noodles when Jason asks him if he's going to keep doing what he's doing and continue fighting anyone related to the case. He points out that no matter how good C is, he can't beat Dukan, who was already like a professional. He implores Jean to stop before he gets hurt. However, Jean rejects his advice and replies that Hagen is still hurting all the guys who hurt him are walking around smiling. Thus, he must protect her with his own methods. Jason accepts his decision and just orders him to run to burn the noodles. Meanwhile, Do-han is at home reading a text rejecting him from a tournament because he hasn't paid the participation fee yet, and due to his pending police case, a creditor slaps away his phone and starts ordering him around. The creditor laughs at him and tells him that if he works for them, then he won't increase the interest on their debt anymore. He will either work for them or should he introduce Do-han's mother, who is shaking in the corner to a different kind of job. Do-han rejects both his offers and instead tells the creditor that he will pay next month their whole debt, including the interest. If he fails to pay, then he'll do anything the creditor will tell him to do. That night, Do-hyun goes and meets up with his friends. His classmates apologize for causing him to get arrested, but Do-han doesn't care about that anymore and instead focuses on where to get money. He orders them to go collect money and he'll be taking care of Si-jun. But before that, he first plans to take care of the long-haired guy who saved Sage and Jason. At that moment, Jason is all dressed up while being teased by his gym buddies. They ask him whether he has a date or an appointment, so Jason reveals that he's just meeting a former coworker. Later, Jason is walking down the streets talking to his coworker on the phone when a guy abruptly asks for his help because his friend is getting beat up in an alley. Jason follows the guy, but who was waiting for him was actually Do-hyun. Han is angry at Jason for reporting him to the police, so he must teach him a lesson. At that moment, one of his friends swung the bat aimed at his head. Thankfully, it was caught by Jason's friend, a woman wearing a leather jacket. Do-han's friend calls the woman. Auntie asks her who she is and tells her to mind her own business. This infuriates the woman, so she hits the guy in the throat and steals his bat. She tells him that bats shouldn't be used on the head, while simultaneously hitting the guy with the bat on his buttocks. She then hits him some more on the back of his thighs. She then tells him that she's just a woman who used to get beaten up when she was young by bullies like them. She points the bat at Dukan and his friends, and orders him to attack her all at once to make it more fun. Jason grabs the bat and tells her to stop since she might kill someone, but his friend just smiles and points out that there are no CCTVs around. The two start making small talk, but Jason gets kicked by the guys who are now annoyed at the two, seemingly acting like everything's normal. The woman hits the D back with a bat. Jun-suk, who is holding a bat, threatens the woman with it, but she just disarms him by hitting his hands. She then brings him down by hitting him on his thighs. She then approaches Do-hyun, the last man standing. Do-han wonders who she is since he doesn't recognize any of her moves. He recognizes that if he doesn't do his best, he's going to die. The woman quickly charges in and Do-han meets her with a punch. However, she vaults over him by using his head as leverage. She starts taunting Dobkin, pointing out that for him, she won't humiliate him, but instead directly attacks his body. Do-hyun quickly turns around and delivers a barrage of punches, which she fluidly dodges when she backs into the wall. Do-han perceives that it's his chance to finally hit, but the woman just uses a bat instead to block Chen as she ducks under his punch. The bat splinters into a dozen pieces while Do-won endures the pain in his fist. The woman then grabs hold of his arm and pulls him down into the ground and into a hold. She threatens to injure Do-han's joints, and he quickly begs her not to. He explains that he's being forced to do this, but the woman replies that she has no interest in his story. Thankfully, Jason chops Do-hyun in the neck, knocking him unconscious, and the woman lets him go because it wasn't fun anymore. Jason then scolds his friend Shinsuke-han for scaring the kids. The two leave the place and Jason asks who can. As she was able to get the information he was asking for Suki and tells her that the investigation data of the assault on Hagen was clean, but she found something else. There were actually two investigation data. One file of the investigation by Detective Jang and another file has already been completed. This makes it seems that the investigation has been already planned from the beginning. Soo-hyun hypothesizes that someone high up must be trying to cover it up. Meanwhile, somewhere a guy, is happily hitting the bloody face of his opponent with his fists.